In this lesson, we'll give you steps on how to take the printed designs and, using the cutter, cut a contour around the printed design. The first part of the lesson will demonstrate how to create a cut path for both vector and image designs. Second, we'll show you how to create registration marks and the purpose for them. Then, after we've printed the design, we'll focus on loading the material and sending the cut path to the cutter. Let's go over creating a cut path. A cut path is a line that is used by DesignR PRO 2 to cut around the image that will be printed. Because of this, the line is usually dashed, not because it's going to cut that way, but to let us know that its purpose is for contour cutting a printed image. Since the cut path is based upon the shape and size of the design, generally creating a cut path is the step you take after the design is complete. Only then should the cut path be added. On the screen is a design that is ready to generate a cut path. It's simple text, but this will demonstrate to us the different methods and options available for generating cut paths. The first method is to take a simple shape and convert it to a cut path. For instance, we can draw an ellipse around the object or design. Let's convert it to a cut path by clicking on the selector tool, which will automatically make the ellipse selected. Click on the Cut pull-down menu, and then select Contour Cut On and Off. Notice the ellipse is no longer solid but dashed, indicating that this is now a cut path that is going to be used to cut around the image. In fact, any vector shape can be converted to a cut path. Let's create a rectangle. Give it rounded corners, and then convert it to a cut path by clicking on the Cut pull-down menu, and then selecting Contour Cut On and Off once more. It too is now a cut path. This can be done to any vector shape that we want to use as a contour cut path. Most of the time though, we'll want the cut path to outline the design itself. This is done by selecting the whole image, in this case the text. Click on the Cut pull-down menu once again, and this time we'll select Contour Cut. It immediately creates a cut path just outside the text. In the Smart Bar, quite a number of settings are here, but we'll only concern ourselves with these two settings for right now. The first one is this offset value, and the other one is how we want the cornering to appear. The offset value is the specified distance between the design and the cut path. As we increase the offset value, the cut path is spaced out further from the object. As it spreads out, you'll notice that the cut paths will weld into each other. In other words, the cut path for each letter will not be individual cut paths, but instead they will automatically be welded together so that there is one cut path. Then if we decrease the offset value of the cut path, it will become closer to the text, to the point when the value is at 0 and the cut line is on the lettering's edge. In this case, let's set the offset to 1/4 of an inch. You notice that the cut path is on the outside, but there is nothing to cut the white space within the design, such as the inside of these letters. Well, that's what this inside-outside check mark is all about. If we check this by clicking on it, this will generate cut paths inside the letters, or anywhere there is white space in a design. Finally, there are these cornering styles. Generally, it depends on what kind of shape the design has developed into that will determine the style of corner to be used. If you have an angular design, then really you likely want the corners to be sharp, or perhaps a chamfer look. Since we have curvy shapes or letters, let's work with the rounded corners on this design. Let's do something a little different. We will uncheck the inside-outside check mark and set the offset to 0. This places the cut path right onto the edge of the lettering. While this can be done, keep in mind that this may cause some issues. For instance, while this print and cut process is highly accurate, there's no guarantee that the cut will be dead on. In other words, if we're printing on this white vinyl, there is a chance that you may see, and it doesn't take much, a little white space, or a sliver of white on the edges of the cut decal. The good news is that there is a way to overcome this. It's by using this bleed value here. If we increase this value, it will spread out or bleed the outline of the object beyond the cut path. Let's set the bleed value to 0.1 and notice what happens. Now it's almost guaranteed there will be no white space because the print is bled beyond the cut path, and there will be no slivers of white once this is weeded. Let's see how we can create a cut path on a bitmap or raster image. Here's an image that has white space around it. We could vectorize this image, but there is a quicker and easier method. First is to select the image. Next is to click on the Cut pull-down menu and select Contour Cut. In the Smart Bar are a couple of settings that we should go over. The Bitmap Frame checkbox will place the cut path around the rectangular shape of the image or bitmap, as if framing it. But this is not what we want. What we want is to contour the image here. This means that the software has to ignore the outside white space. Let's set the offset to 0.1 again, and set the cornering to sharp. But notice that nothing has happened. This is because prior to creating the cut path, we have to click Apply. Once we do that, this monochrome filter window appears. This is basically asking for the threshold between the white and the colored parts of the image. We want to basically have it ignore the white portions of the image, using just the colored parts to outline. The farther the slide moves to the left, the more colors will be included to ignore. For images like this, it's best to keep it to the far right. If you are using this method, experiment with the different settings. In this case, we can leave it as is and click OK. The cut path appears. Keep in mind the cut path will not change until we click Apply. So here we have the ability to make a cut path without adding in the extra task of vectorizing the image by using AccuScan prior to making a cut path. The next step to the process is creating the registration marks. Registration marks are little L shapes or corner brackets that are placed in the four corners outside both the design and the cut path. The Graphtec cutters will use these registration marks as reference points to accurately follow the cutting path within the design. That's why they'll always be included with the final print. To create the registration marks, all the objects in the design have to be selected, including the cut path. To access the Multi-Registration Mark tool, click on the Shapes flyout toolbar, and then click on the Multi-Registration Mark tool. In the Smart Bar are several options related to registration marks. The first being the registration mark type. In this box, we can start scrolling up or down. The type we want is the bracket type, which is this shape here. Once found, click on it to accept these registration marks. Next, we want to set the height and width of each registration mark to 0.78, which is a good value to use for the majority of jobs. This diagram is where the number of registration marks can also be set, as well as their locations. Normally, this is set to the four corners, since this will deliver better cutting accuracy. If the design is smaller, you may decide to use only 3. The offset is the distance between the registration marks and the outside cut path. It's generally best to set this to a value to ½ inch or greater if cutting a box-like design. With this design, the offset value can be smaller. We can click Close, and the registration marks are placed on the four corners of the design. Once the registration marks are set, the design can be sent to the printer. To do this, we click on the File pull-down menu, and then click Print. After the print options have been set, click OK. Next is to cut the design. Let's open the plotting defaults by clicking on the Cut pull-down menu, and then select Plotting Defaults. In this window, under the Tools section on the right-hand side, the tool setting has to be changed from Setting 1 to Reg Mark Tool. This will ensure that the workspace in cut preview mode will only process the contoured cut path and the registration marks. Click Apply, and then Close. Once the print is completed, load it onto the cutter. At this point, it would be helpful to know how to orient the print to the cutter. The cut preview mode can help us with this. Looking at the workspace, remember that the cutter will be on the left side and the media will be traveling from right to left. It's these two registration marks that have to be identified on the print because they are the ones that will be traveling through the front of the cutter first. This is important because if the wrong registration marks are placed first, the cut will be opposite of the design, or the registration marks might not be found. When loading the media, we want to keep it as straight as possible, especially for longer jobs. The best way to achieve this is to use your fingers on the two front registration marks and then feel for the cutting channel or ledge. This will ensure that the image is aligned perfectly. Once it's aligned, set the latch. Press Roll 1. This will move the registration marks behind the wheels. Next, move the tool using the arrow key so that the cutting tool holder is right above the registration mark closest to the control panel. In other words, if you're facing the machine, it's the registration mark on the right-hand side. Placement of the tool tip should be within the registration mark such that if the registration mark were a full square, the tool would be placed right in the center of it. Now that the media is loaded and the cutting tool is above the first registration mark, let's switch back to the iDesigner Pro 2. In the cut preview window, there's both the cut path and the registration marks. Since we don't want to cut the registration marks, let's turn them off by clicking on this Cut by Color button, and make sure that this checkbox, Filter Reg Marks, is enabled. To send the cut path to the cutter, as before, we click on the Cut button at the end of the Cut toolbar, and this message will appear. It's asking if the tool is over the first registration mark. It is, so we can go ahead and click OK. The cutter will then start to search for the registration marks. And once it finds all four, it will come back and cut the contour cut path.